I going to allow this to create an insecurity for me? Or am I going to acknowledge the insecurity, figure out like where it's coming from, and then take action to make sure that even though that insecurity is there, how am I using it in a way where it fuels me versus acts as an Achilles heel, like prevents me? Only 4% of women in business hit $1 million in revenue. And of that 4%, 54% of them are able to hit $1 million because they go after corporate and government contracts. Tap into your badassery, like tap into your uniqueness, tap into your magic, because that is what will set you free. And it also is what's going to help you be the most successful, because people are tired of the same vanilla, same thing. Everything looks the same. Everything sounds the same. Like, people are yearning for diversity.
Hello, everyone. This is Pam, the Café con Pam, the bilingual podcast that features Latine and people of the global majority who break barriers, change lives, and make the world a better place. Welcome to episode 374 of Café con Pam. Today, we have a conversation with Victoria Jenn Rodriguez. Victoria is a master mindset and business consultant, media personality, and acclaimed international keynote speaker with over 20 years of experience. She's trained more than 20,000 leaders and entrepreneurs on optimizing performance with a focus on emotional intelligence, life balance, and empathetic leadership. As the CEO of Dare to Leap Academy, an online education platform, she empowers ambitious women to transition from corporate life to entrepreneurship without sacrificing financial security or being held back by imposter syndrome. Victoria's unique approach to advising organizations on building high engagement workplace cultures that attract, develop, and retain top talents set her apart. Her expertise in creating programming that drives inclusion and emotional wellness has proven to increase employee morale, brand loyalty, and making her an invaluable mentor in the corporate world. Victoria's influence extends beyond consulting as a charismatic host of the popular video podcast Banking on Cultura, which has garnered over 100 million impressions since its launch. In addition to her media presence, Victoria is the founder of the Female Collaborative, Inc., a nonprofit dedicated to revolutionizing the way women do work and do business together. She also serves on the executive board of the Bronx Global Learning Institute for Girls, a charter school committed to shaping the next generation of women global leaders. Bueno, listeners, this conversation with Victoria Jenn was super fun. I, of course, got into the depths of her story, and we got to explore a lot of the things. And I think, as someone who does inner child work, I saw a lot of the connections that happened from her inner niña childhood, how she grew up and what she experienced, into the career that she chose, and even how she shows up in the world today. Victoria Jenn's story is fascinating. It's full of depth, and I think it's one story like lots of our stories that have a lot of ups and downs and arounds and loops and hoops, and it's beautiful and intricate, and I think you'll leave really inspired. Y bueno, sin más, here's my conversation with Victoria Jenn Rodriguez. Victoria Jenn, welcome to Café con Pam. How are you?
I am amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I got my cafecito. I am ready.
Let's do it. So the first question that we always ask is, what is your heritage?
So I'm a mutt, quite honestly. So my dad is Boricua. He was born and raised on the island, came to the United States at 15 years old. And my mom was Italian, Irish, and Polish. However, I grew up mainly with my father's side of the family, so I identify very much with my Latinidad and that part of my culture.
And so you grew up with dad, basically.
I grew up with dad, single dad, so I'm a big time daddy's girl.
And you grew up in New York?
I grew up in New York, had a small stint in Orlando, Florida for a few years, but majority of my life in New York.
And so how was it for little Victoria Jenn to grow up with dad? And did you have to navigate people asking questions, especially in a big city? You know, kids ask questions all the time? I mean, I guess everywhere. How was it for you?
Yeah. Nobody ever really pressed me about growing up with a single dad. I myself actually used to put pressure on myself because my dad is 82
Okay.
and I am 41. So there's a discrepancy. So when I was younger, all of my friends' families were younger than my dad. So I used to say, like, who's gonna walk me down the aisle? Like, is my dad gonna be around? I was young and, you know, making up stories in my head. But kids never really, like, I didn't get questioned about it. Parents didn't question me about it. So it was kind of my norm and it was never really questioned, honestly.
So it was more kind of like the pressure that you put on yourself.
It was definitely the pressure that I put on myself. And obviously, as a girl, there was always like a yearning to have a woman in the house. But my mother was always in my life. It wasn't like she wasn't in my life. So I would see her often. And, daddy was a papi chulo. So he had women in his life as well. I also had an amazing stepmom who helped raise me. So I never really missed the female element because I always had amazing women in my life. But of course, every child wants their parents to like be together. But there was a point where they were together and I made the choice to go live with my dad. And the rest is history from there.
So it sounds like more so than him being a single dad, it was more so his age.
Yes, it was definitely more so his age because there was such a huge discrepancy between his age and kids that I knew and their parents'
Yeah.
age. So I was like, wow, my dad had me when he was 42.
Okay.
So he was already seasoned, he already had kids. So like he was on the older side, right? Usually people are having kids before then. So I would see that growing up and I would be like, what's gonna happen? Like, is he gonna be around? Is he gonna be able to walk me down the aisle? Like I used to make up all these crazy stories. And meanwhile, he's 82. We just got back from the Bahamas. He has more of a social life than I do. He's a ball of energy. So, God is blessing us.
That's awesome. And did you ever ask him these questions, or was it just in your head?
Did I ever ask him why he had
Like,
me at such an older
yeah.
age? Well, okay, we're gonna get into the bochinche. That's what we're doing here. Okay. I actually shared this like on my social media. Like if anybody follows me on my social media, they know like I'm a daddy's girl. I talk about this all the time because I think it's important for us to normalize our stories, even though they might not be the traditional way that we
Mhm.
normally see how kids are raised or how they get to this earth. So the way that I was born, my dad was married, my mom was married, they cheated on each other and had me.
Okay.
They each cheated on their spouse and they had me. So I was a love child. And, originally my dad didn't want me because he had a whole family. So he was scared. He was like, you know what? I don't think I want this. But my mom was like, doesn't matter. I'm having her. And so the legend goes that my dad came to the hospital when I was born. And once he saw me, the rest is history. My mother also strategically named me after my father. So my father's name is Victor, just like
Mm.
Victoria. So that also, I think, created an additional bond and also was like my mother's way of being like, no, she's
She
yours.
yours, yeah.
And and you're gonna claim her, whether you like it or not. So
Totally. And so you have siblings from both sides?
I have siblings from both sides, yes. I have two younger sisters I have three sisters from my mother's side and a brother and a sister from my father's side.
And yours the baby, or they're younger?
I'm in the middle, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have a relationship with them, obviously, with your siblings.
Yes, I do.
And I love inquiring about non-traditional family dynamics because it's something that often happens everywhere, frankly. It's not
Right.
we just know, quote, traditional family dynamics because that's what we see painted on TV. And so I think to your point of normalizing your story, it's important to talk about it and say, I have siblings on one side, I have siblings on the other side, and we like talk and it's totally fine. Like yesterday, I had a conversation with someone who is she grew up in the foster care system. And so she's like, I have like 14 siblings. And I was like, that's awesome. And sometimes she's in San Diego and she's like, sometimes like you just lose track of where they go, but they're your siblings because you shared foster parents in her case.
Right.
Those are the stories that I think are not represented in the media. They're not told in places. And so thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to own our stories,
Mhm.
regardless of how flawed you might perceive them to be, or maybe you feel embarrassed by those stories. It will set you free once you own your story. And so I think it's whenever I share these like intimate stories of my upbringing and my family tree, people are usually like shocked and they're like, wow. But then they're like, oh, wait, hold on. I can relate to that. Like, my dad did this, my mom did that, or I have a half brother, I have a half sister. But what it also does is it gives them permission to now own their story, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's why I do it. I do it because it brings me freedom to own my story, makes me more confident because it's like, what are you going to say to me? I own every part of my story. But it also gives other people permission to share their stories.
Absolutely. And even acceptance to your parents because they did the best they could with what they had at the moment, and who are we to judge them?
Exactly. Yeah, as you get older, isn't that funny? Like as you get older, you begin to understand why your parents
Yes.
did certain things, and you forgive them for things you may have not understood when you were younger. So, listen, anyone who's getting older and you're feeling away, listen, it brings wisdom.
It does. A lot of it.
It
A
brings
lot of it.
wisdom, okay, and clarity. You want all those things.
Totally. Okay, so you grow up in New York and you had this moment when you went to Orlando. And so and you went into the corporate world. So
Yes.
that was kind of like the path. Was it the path because your upbringing, like, was it your dad that was like, you need to go the security, like, this is the secure way of making a living? How did you get into the corporate world?
Like many Latinos and folks of color, we've been preconditioned to believe that there's a certain path that you need to follow in order to achieve success. And so I drank that Kool-Aid too, right? It was go to school, it was get the job, work the job, get the benefits, get the money, keep your
Mhm.
head down, and then go back and do the same thing tomorrow. For me, I was the first one in my family to go to college, the first one in my family to get into corporate, and the first one in my family to start a business. So the traditional path brought me to Wall Street, where I started my career. I went to Baruch in New York City, which is mainly like a finance school. That's what I majored in finance, because I knew I wanted to make money.
Mm.
I said, what can get me to the bag the quickest? Finance. That's what I'm going to do. Not because I was introduced to finance, not because I was interested per se. I mean, the markets did interest me, it did fascinate me, but it was because of the money that was attached to it.
Okay.
Um, so my dad worked his butt off. He would wake up at like 4 a.m. every single day, open up a restaurant in the a financial district, ironically, on Wall Street. And I used to go with him as a little girl every morning. He used to wake me up, and I used to hate it. He used to wake me up so early, doing my hair, and like literally chug me along to this restaurant. I used to sleep in the booths when I was a little girl, but it was right in the heart of the financial district in New York City, which, thinking back on it now, I think of like the foreshadowing. Like I literally was a little girl going to the Wall Street district, basically by the stock exchange, by the
Yes.
bull in New York City. So it was like almost like crazy and serendipitous that I ended up doing finance when I went to school. But yeah, daddy bust his bum to get me, where I am today. So went to school. Then once I was exposed to school, I was like, okay, this is interesting. Let me follow the money. Let me do finance. And then got my first corporate gig after I I graduated and was in corporate for 15 years. And then 7 years ago is when I decided to bet on myself, start my business, and haven't looked back ever since.
Okay, so we're gonna break that down. So,
Okay.
because you went too fast.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I love that as a little girl, you would go to the financial district and kind of like witness, in a way, like your future.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And do you remember if you ever thought like, oh, these people in like suit and ties, like what do they do? Did you ever ask, or was that something like you were just kind of like putting one foot in front of the other?
I don't remember. I don't remember asking about that, but I remember being fascinated by it. Like when I started my career in corporate, like I would get the Brooks Brothers suits, like the St. John suits. Like I was decked. You could not tell me nothing. Like I was looking the part and I felt like really powerful in those suits, right? I felt like I have arrived, and also, being the first one in my family to work on in corporate,
Hmm.
to work on Wall Street, to make six figures. That was like my first real introduction to wealth and how much money people were really making, because my dad was really good at making me feel and creating an environment where I felt like we were rich. Like I didn't feel limited. Like my prom dress was like $700. Like I didn't go for anything. Anything I wanted, daddy provided. So I didn't feel like we were middle class, right? On the lower part of middle class. I didn't feel that way. Even though my neighborhood, like if I go there now, like I know, because I know better now, like what it is. But when I was younger, like I thought that was the norm. Like I thought that's what it was because I wasn't exposed to anything else, right? Until I
Mm.
got to Wall Street and I was like, hold up, what's this? A Lambo? What is this?
Right.
What is this? What? I remember going to a restaurant one time with the brokers. It was so funny. And it's like this steakhouse. They had like the meat hanging in like the glass see-through kind of like shelves where you can pick like what part of the cow you wanted to eat. It was very bougie, my kind of style. And I was like, oh, this is nice, right? And I remember the waiter asking me like, what would I like? And I ordered arugula.
Okay.
And then it comes to the table and I was like, oh, I didn't order this. And he's like, you ordered the arugula. And I was like, isn't arugula cheese? Everyone starts laughing. I thought arugula was cheese because I never had arugula before.
Yes.
Meanwhile, it was lettuce. It was the funniest thing. And there were so many moments like that happened when I was on Wall Street because I was never exposed. I had no idea. Right. I never was introduced to that world before. Like at home we would have an ensalada, Roman lettuce, like ramen lettuce. Like how do you call that lettuce? The regular lettuce.
uh,
Romaine
romaine
lettuce, is
lettuce,
that what
yeah,
it is?
I think.
I never had like fancy arugula lettuce
Arugula.
before.
Yes.
So it was new to me.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions about that because the average person would feel less than at that moment.
Yeah.
So many questions. Actually, let's pause on that question because we can go like so much into you getting there. But I'm very curious about when you say you wanted to your interest was in money.
Right.
When did you decide that? Was it around a conversation? Was it because I love that your dad, like you were raised with this you don't know what you don't know idea, and you're abundant with what we have and you felt rich with what was there. And so it's almost like looking back now, it's like, oh, we actually didn't have that much, or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the time, there wasn't a question. And so when did it come to mind that you wanted money? What happened? What inspired that?
What inspired that I wanted money? I don't know. Maybe it was because as a little girl, I was around Wall Street and I would be around money and I would see what looked like success. And maybe that's what inspired it. I don't really know. I don't really know. Maybe it's because New York. Listen, growing up in New
Yeah.
York, there's
Yes.
just like this grit. There's just like this hustle mentality that just comes with the city. So, traveling to the city as a little girl, going to school in the city, growing up in New York, like it's almost like infused in you
Mm.
to want and desire more. So I think that has a lot to do with it. But that's a really interesting question because it's not like my family, like I was exposed to like yachts and mansions or anything like that. I think it really had a lot to do with growing up in New York and just coming from a city that is based on, having this grit and this hustle, this thick skin. Um, and growing up with a single dad and seeing how hard he worked
Hmm.
for his money, I think that really is what drove it.
I mean, looking at it from the outside in, I do think it might have had a lot of influence to go to the financial district all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, kinda like subconsciously, then
Mhm.
you chose that path, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely like planted a seed.
Totally.
And even as a little girl, I would my dad would send me to Puerto Rico every summer by myself. So I would travel by myself, and because of that, like I would usually get bumped to first class.
Nice.
So when I was a little girl, I was exposed to first class and I was like, "Oh, this is nice. Like this is luxury. Like this is how I want to travel." And now as an
Yes.
adult, I'm like, "Wow, when I was a little kid, like this was all like foreshadowing cuz now I'm like I only want to travel first class. Like I'm real bougie even though I don't get to all the time cuz the prices are ridiculous, but it was an exposure that I had that helped me see things differently, which I think is
Mhm.
so important. Why access and just inserting yourself in environments that are new, make you uncomfortable, that is outside of your norm, helps you grow so much, right? Because if as a little girl I never knew first class exists, you know, I wouldn't have known that that was a luxury that I wanted to aspire for, or that was a space that I deserve to be in.
Totally. And now you have evidence of what that is, which lets you look for that more.
Correct.
Okay, so now let's talk about you make it to finance, and I, like, of course, immediately as I said that, I got the TikTok song, "I'm looking for a man in finance."
Those TikToks are hilarious.
So you're there. Did you ever feel intimidated with, like, the people? Because, for example, when I had my first experience with a financial planner, it was with a white man, and I wanted to cry because the way that he talked about money was, I would literally ask questions and be like, "What do you mean you don't know?" And I'm like,
Mm,
"No," because I didn't grow up with a
right,
trust fund. Like, I don't know. These are not conversations that I grew up with.
right.
And so you being in the environment, did you ever feel like, "Ooh, I don't know enough?" Or was it like, "I'll learn it."
At the beginning, when I first got there, what was a little intimidating was, wow, do I deserve all this money? Am I worthy of this type of money? That was kind of like the first thought, but that faded very quickly, and I owe that to growing up in New York City and also growing up with a single dad, because it was kind of like one of those things that I felt it, I acknowledged it, and then I was like, get over it. Basically, because I was the only Latina on the trading desk. I was the youngest Latina on the trading floor. So there weren't many that looked like me. And there were already very few women on the trading floor, period.
Right.
So it was already a space where I was the only, but maybe growing up with the single dad where I was the only, like I basically
Mm,
grew up on my own, was preparing me to be the only in many spaces. And don't get me wrong, at first you're always going to notice, like you're going to notice you're the only, you're going to notice like, wow, nobody here looks like me, Nobody here sounds like me. Nobody here dresses like me. Nobody here has my accent. Like, you definitely notice those things. You're human. You're going to acknowledge those things. But I think that it's at that moment we have a choice. Okay, am I going to allow this to create an insecurity for me? Or am I going to acknowledge the insecurity, figure out like where it's coming from, and then take action to make sure that even though that insecurity is there, how am I using it in a way where it fuels me versus acts as an Achilles heel, like prevents me? How do I use this insecurity to like keep going? Because it's okay to acknowledge our feelings and acknowledge, if we're uncomfortable or we're not feeling a way, like you're human. But you do have a choice with how you behave after you identify that insecurity, and that you have control over.
Totally. Did you ever sabotage a success?
Did I ever sabotage a success? Probably. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've said something that rubbed someone wrong. I'm pretty sure that I, acted away. But I think that's part of growing up, like, and becoming a seasoned professional and becoming more mature, and also becoming more aware and just more comfortable in your own skin. I mean, I remember when I was doing an internship at Lehman Brothers while I was in college. And one of my mentors was like, "Oh, I'm going to go have you shadow this trading desk." It was a whole bunch of dudes, blanquitos, white dudes. And they're cursing up a storm, F bombs here, F bomb there. And I'm like, wow, I love this. Like, this is cool,
Uh-huh.
And it was just like in the movies, like you see in the movies where they're like cursing, shouting, trades, all that. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I remember the guy coming to check in on me, and he was like, what do you think? And I was like, man, this shit is so cool. And we just carried on in the conversation. And then the next day, my mentor is like, hey, how'd you do? Like, what'd you think of the experience? And I was like, it was incredible. Thank you so much for setting it up. She was like, well, I want to give you some feedback. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, well, they felt it was inappropriate for you to curse
Wow.
while you were sitting there. And I was like, oh, it was inappropriate for me
Right.
to curse. Why? Because I'm a girl? Is that why it was inappropriate? And
Wow.
meanwhile, shit to me is not a curse word. I don't know.
Right.
The words they were using were way more, kind of, I would say, raw than the word that I use. But it was like one of those moments where it was like, oh, okay.
That's how the game is.
Yeah, like, all right, I see how this goes. But that could have sabotaged my success,
Totally.
right? It could have. And I know there was plenty more moments of that where they were like, all right, B, like, simmer down. I mean, that was my feedback that I got throughout corporate was, Victoria, you're an amazing asset to the team. We love working with you, but can can you simmer down? Basically, was what they were saying. And in my head, I used to laugh about it. I used to be like, "What do you mean simmer down?" And there was no way for me to do that because that means that you're asking me to be somebody that I'm not, and I
Yes.
can't do that. So it was so funny, like literally throughout my 15-year career in corporate, I used to get the same feedback during feedback. Like, you're amazing, you're great to work with, but cógelo con take it easy. Like, you too much.
Wow.
That's my light. What you want me to do? What you want me to do? And it used to be so hard for me to see, because I'm like, what do you mean? And I used to ask them for examples, and they were like, well, it's hard to identify, but it's a common, you know, feeling amongst the team. And I'm like, well, that's not helpful. So
Right. So they never actually gave you like tangible things?
they never actually gave me tangible examples of when I was being too much,
Oh my
which
gosh.
then signaled to me was
Your light's too bright.
they're just not enough. Yeah, that basically. And it's like, okay, well, it was kind of like this interesting place to be with, because I would advance in my career and I would get promoted and I would make more money and I would still advance. And it was like, okay, so the same thing that is helping me
Mm.
advance,
Mm.
right? You're trying to tell me that I need to cap it to make other people comfortable.
Oof.
So it was a very interesting kind of time for me, because it was like, when somebody gives you constructive feedback, inevitably you're going to be like, am I like that? Is
Yes.
this really something wrong with me? And you start looking back and you start thinking about, should I have done this differently? Should I have done that, etc.? And if you're not careful, you will internalize someone's feedback and completely shift their behavior and transform and adapt to this environment where now you're spending the majority of your time pretending to be somebody that you're not, just so other people can receive you. Now, last thing I'll say on this, there are times where you do need to flex your leadership style. When in Rome, do as Romans do. Like, there is something to having that type of professional aptitude where you're able to know, like, okay, in this environment, I'm probably not going to curse today.
Right.
There's something to that. And I'm not saying that you should ignore that. Like, that is a leadership trait for you to be able to identify that and know how to flex your style. But if there is a situation where someone is blatantly telling you that you need to be somebody that you are not, like to your core, that is not who you are, it's easy for you to fall into that trap. And then one day you wake up and be like, who am I? Like, I don't even know who the hell I am, because you're so busy trying to appease everybody else and you lose yourself.
Totally. And I think this is why there's so many people in corporate that have assimilated so burnt out because they've
Yeah,
spent days, months, years assimilating into the corporate culture.
right. And it's very easy for Latinas, folks of color, women, even fellas, like, it's easy to feel like, okay, I need to look like this, I need to sound like this, I need to show up like this, I need to be like everyone else, I need to follow in line, because that's how I'm going to be successful. And in many of these environments, that is very much the case.
Mm-hmm.
But I always try to challenge people to think about, okay, if you keep oiling the machine, nothing is ever going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. So when you go home and you complain and you feel lost and you feel empty and you feel like you don't know who you are, you're just adding to that same cycle of confusion and ambiguity, so that the person coming behind you now has to go into that environment and play the same game, because you decided that you weren't going to rock the boat.
Totally.
You weren't going to color outside the lines. You were going to just drink the Kool-Aid and go with the flow. And listen, I get it. So it's easier to do that. It is easier to adapt, right? Because it takes so much more bravery and courage to actually be who you are and to accept who you are, flaws and all. Like, it's easier to just like assimilate. Um, so I understand, but I always encourage folks to like tap into your badassery, like tap into your uniqueness, tap into your magic, because that is what will set you free. And it also is what's going to help you be the most successful, because people are tired of the same vanilla, same thing. Everything looks the same, everything sounds the same. Like, people are yearning for diversity, they're yearning for edge, right? They're
Yeah.
yearning for the spice.
Yep.
So give them some of your song. Like, stop covering that up.
Let's go. Okay. So we're going to take a quick coffee break and we're going to talk about after when you decided to not leave corporate and then come back, or like the catalyst to say, I'm not going to go back to corporate. I'm just going to start my business. But let's take a quick coffee break first.
Okay, cafecito break.
Cafecito break.
Sabrosura pa' ti que qué.
Victoria Jenn, do you drink coffee?
I do. I'm Puerto Rican, girl.
I know. Well, I've interviewed a couple that don't. So I always
No,
ask.
I hear you. I hear you. I'm actually weaning to mushroom coffee.
Mm.
And it actually doesn't taste bad. It doesn't taste It tastes kind of good to me, but that's because I've been training my palate to be more vegan friendly.
Yes.
So my palate is kind of like, this could be interesting. But I grew up on coffee. I had my first like taste of coffee at like 6 years old. So
For sure. That's how we grow up. 100%. Cafecito
yeah,
con leche.
yeah, exactly.
So I am drinking actually mushroom coffee. I do drink mushroom
Oh,
coffee.
okay.
It is an acquired taste. It is something that you kind of like have to, like you said, get used to it.
Right.
And I do, listeners know this, I add powdered milk, but this is like, it's not half and half in
Oh,
powder. It's like actually whole milk in powder, which is like the weirdest thing, but it just tastes so
interesting.
good. It gives the coffee a lot of like creaminess. So it's almost, I make it almost like a latte, but not quite.
And you're drinking it warm.
Yeah, I'm a hot coffee. Yeah.
I've only had mushroom coffee cold, so I don't know
Mm.
how it tastes warm. So I gotta try that out. I'm a little nervous to see if it like.
It changes a little. It
Yeah,
does.
I
It
could
does.
imagine, but that
Yeah.
powdered is interesting. Okay.
Yeah. How do you drink your coffee?
Well, when I'm not on my healthy vibe, I drink my coffee light and sweet, just like me.
Hmm.
But when I am on my healthy vibe, I'm changing out regular coffee for like oat milk or almond milk and regular sugar for like agave, or I'll throw in a Splendor in there
Nice.
with some cinnamon. Always got to have cinnamon in my coffee. I love cinnamon in my coffee. Um and yeah, that usually does it for me. I love cappuccinos. Cappuccinos are a vibe for me.
So you do both iced or hot.
Yeah, I do iced and hot coffee. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Awesome.
In the winter I'm more warm, but in the summer I'm more iced cuz
Nice. For
the
sure.
weather. Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. Well, let's go back to the show.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. So you are in this corporate world. What happens that do you get laid off? Is that what happened?
Yes. So I actually got laid off twice in my corporate career. The first time I got laid off, I was like shocked. I was like, what do you mean you're laying me off? Like, what is, and it was like, so this is why corporate is so interesting. Like, they lay you off, they pull you into an office and they're like, we're laying you off. And then you got to like pack up your stuff and be out of the building within 30 minutes. Like,
Yeah,
it's insane.
it is wild.
And I was like, oh, okay, I'm laid off. But that was my first introduction to severance pay. I didn't even know what that was. But I was like, oh, I'm getting money to not work and I'm getting healthcare. I was
Why
like,
not?
this is cool.
Yes.
And the first time I got laid off, I also broke up with my boyfriend at the time, who I was with for like 3.5 years. So I was like, oh my God, I was like heartbroken. I got laid off. And I remember my girlfriend was living in Hong Kong at the time.
Okay.
And within 5 days, I hired a travel company and I was like, girl, I need to go across the globe. I need out. I'm going to Hong Kong. So I went to Hong Kong by myself and she would work throughout the day. Luckily, she let me stay at her place and I would just like go to the temples and I would just roam and I would just like find myself in this scene. And then I come back and I was still living in New York at the time. I come back and I remember having a conversation with one of my best friends and I'm like, I'm crying because I'm like, yo, am I going to find another job? Like, what's happening? Like, I'm not being able to close. And then I got this opportunity for a job in New Jersey. And I was like, New Jersey? Every New Yorker is like,
Yes.
New Jersey? Like,
Yes.
we don't want to go to New Jersey.
Yes.
And I went on an interview and they kind of gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. They were paying for my move. They were paying me 6 figures. And I was like,
New Jersey's not that bad.
yeah, I'm out to Jersey. So that's how I got to Jersey. And then the last job that I had here in New Jersey, I was heading up talent management for Johnson and Johnson. And they laid me off. They wanted to relocate me to Tampa. And I'm definitely more of a Miami girl. No shade to Tampa, but I was like, I'm not going to Tampa. And at the time, I got along with corporate. Like I was making six figures. I had my benefits. I was traveling, staying at 5-star hotels. Like I was living la vida. I was good. And I would go on these interviews and I would make it to final round and I wasn't closing. And I was like, what's happening? Like, I'm a closer. Like, what's happening? And so I took it as a sign from God to be like, you know what, V, you got some savings. Why don't you try to do something here with it? And then in worst case scenario, you can always go back. You know, you've been in corporate 15 years, you got a network, like you'll be able to find a job. So I decided to do interview training and resume reviews because when I was in corporate, I was doing talent management. So I would interview people all the time. I would recruit. So I was like, all right, let me do this. So I started making money doing resume reviews, coaching people on interviews. Until one day I went to this conference in Napa, California. It was like a Latino-led conference, very bourgeoisie. It was invite only. And I ended up meeting this gentleman, and he was talking to me about his business. I was telling him, hey, I just started this. And he was like, oh, well, I made six figures in like 3 months by working on this one project. And I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean you made six figures working 3 months? And he broke down the whole consulting industry to me over Latino owned wine while we were in the middle of Napa. And he put me on to like how to basically be a consultant. And at that point I decided, okay, I'm no longer doing resume reviews and interview training. I'm going after the corporate bag. And that was my first introduction to doing consulting in corporate. So essentially making my employers my clients.
Your clients, totally. And so how does Dare to Leap Academy come about?
So the Dare to Leap Academy came about because, you know, people online were seeing that I made this transition, right? I left corporate, made the transition to entrepreneurship. I'm making money. Like I figured out the code, and I started getting a lot of questions of like, hey, how the hell did you do this? Like, how are you making money? How do you start your business? How do you know where to start? And so I decided to create a curriculum literally with a framework of every step that I took to make the successful transition from corporate to entrepreneurship. And so now the Academy is an online platform that shows women who are in corporate how to make the transition without losing their financial security. So essentially, what that means is I'm showing you how to start your business while you're still working so that when you leave, you never have to go back because you've already built your foundation. And I show you how to make your employer your first business sponsor. And I think a key differentiator for us and what I really like to teach women is the significance of B2B business, right? B2B business, doing business with other businesses, going after corporate and government contracts, because only 4% of women in business hit $1 million in revenue. And of that 4%, 54% of them are able to hit 1 million because they go after corporate and government contracts. So it's a way for you to accelerate your income, accelerate your learning curve, accelerate your brand in the marketplace. And once you have that education, you can still do direct to consumer. But if you know, like, oh, I can get this like corporate bag because they pay more, and you know the money comes faster on the corporate side, many times more over than on the consumer side. So now that you know that, you can have a B2B model where you're getting your corporate bag, and you can also have a consumer model. And that literally is my model, right? The Dare to Leap Academy is
your consumer, yeah.
Right. But like my consultancy, my advisory, my speaking engagements, that's all corporate money. So it's multiple pillars in my business that make up my model. So that's what I try to teach, is making sure like like there isn't one way for you to sell. There's multiple ways for you to sell your product, your service, your skill set. And I think also one of the key pillars of the program, which I really double down on, is mindset. Like foundation of everything that you do is mindset. Listen, it is hard to be like, oh, I make six figures a year, or I make 80 grand a year, and to think that you can make 80 grand in 2 months.
Yes.
That takes a lot for somebody to like get used to, and also even ask
Yes.
to get paid that amount of money. Like, I remember when I was getting my first corporate contract, it was for $175,000. And the reason why I got it to $175,000 is because that same gentleman that I met in Napa, I called him and I said, hey, how should I price this? And he was like, you should price it at 175 grand. I said, what?
What were you going to charge before you talked to him?
I was going to charge like, I think it was like 120, I think it was what I was thinking.
Okay. So it wasn't too far off.
Yeah, it wasn't too far off. But that's only because I would watch the consulting shows on HBO. I forgot the name of the show, but it was about these consultants. And I was seeing them charge like 6 figures to have like 3 meetings. And I was like, oh, this is what this is.
Yeah.
But that was after he put me on in Napa. That's when I started doing more research and homework. But it was him who was like, no, you can charge 175 grand for this. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I hadn't even made 175 grand a year in my career yet. So I was like, what? I could charge him 175 grand? And he's like, yeah. And he coached me through the process. And that's when like the signal went off. But it took someone telling me, like, no, you can charge this amount. Like, you can come in at a premium. Like, this is the type of money that they spend, and this is what they're used to like spending. If you go in there asking them for 60 grand, they're gonna look at you like you have no experience, right? And you think you're asking for a lot of money when you're not. You're actually like discounting yourself a lot. So mindset is incredibly significant. And also, you know, a lot of us have a scarcity mindset around money, you know, thinking that we're unworthy or thinking that taking on debt is this incredibly like, oh my God, debt? Like, we're taught like debt is like the devil. Like, if you have any, like, I know people who refuse to use credit cards. And I was like, what? Why do you refuse to use credit cards? Like, you got to leverage. I always say OPM, other people's money, is what the wealthy does. They don't use their money for nothing. They're using your money that you put into the bank in your savings account. They're using that money to go and build their dream, right? And so it's a lot of mindset work and kind of unlearning that needs to happen in order for this thing to actually work. So a big component of the program is mindset. Like 50% of the program is mindset, because once you are able to master your mindset, like the sky's the limit.
Totally. I agree. It makes me think of a long time ago when I started my business. I literally did that. And one thing that I've learned over time, which my partner reminds me of this all the time, is that people hiring you, they're not your friends. And so whether it's working with a brand or with a client, like, they're not your friends, you know, they can be very nice to you. And I was doing a corporate proposal, and I ended up getting the contract. And once I finished, and one Latina hired me actually. But one thing I've learned over time is that they work for the company that I'm a friend.
Right.
And so at the end of the contract, once I had finished all the work, she was like, okay, Pam, I'm going to tell you now, you charge way too little. And I'm going to send you the proposals that we got from the other people so you could see how much you could have charged. And we would have paid that for you. And so even though she wasn't my friend during the hiring, she ended up coming through afterwards. But it's almost like this guy who met you in Napa and was like, let me just give you a little bit so you can build up from it. And to your point, is like, you kind of like, we get those nuggets, and if we don't take them and run with them and grow with them, we're going to stay stuck where we were.
Yeah. And not only that, like, if you think about it, like, if you're just starting and you're like, oh, you know, I'm just starting, like, I can't ask them to pay me this. Like, I just started. And so you come in at like this discount, and really what you do is you bring the overall market value down.
Yes.
So now when you and I go and tell them, no, this is going to cost you 100 grand, they're like, well, we have someone in the marketplace who's going to do this for 60. So like, you mess it up for everybody.
For everybody. Totally.
Yeah. When you discount yourself. But if all of us are charging high prices, like, that's the pro. Like, yes, just like when you go to Louis Vuitton, you know, you dropping coins because everything in there is expensive. Like, it needs to be the same thought process for you and your business, because if not, you're like messing it up. You're not only messing up your bag, you're messing up everybody else's bag by going in at a discounted price.
Totally. Agree 100%. And I think this is why it's important to have these conversations and even, behind closed doors, like being open to be like, no, this is not what you do. And programs like yours. So tell us all the places and spaces where we can find it. And you.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, victoriajen.com. So it's Victoria, JENN.com. Or you can catch me on Instagram at I am Victoria Jenn, LinkedIn, Victoria Jenn Rodriguez. Listen, Google my name. You will see me come up. I spent a lot of time and
Billing.
invested a lot for you to find me. So you're going to be able to find me. But I would say, like, my favorite place right now where I spend a lot of my time is with my podcast, Banking on Cultura. And Banking on Cultura is a space that I created to not only provide resources and tools for you to start and grow your business, but also a place for you to get connected to your cultura and really connect with your heritage and your upbringing and really understand the significance of using your culture as a competitive advantage versus an Achilles heel. And the only way to do that is to get educated on your culture and understand like how magical and powerful you are, and like literally your lineage and your ancestors, how you are so powerful, right? And why you deserve to be in the spaces that you are in, and why you deserve to bring Sasson to the office every day if that's how you feel. So it's a place where I spend a lot of time. We're about to come on our 1 year anniversary,
Yay.
September, this Hispanic Heritage Month. So I'm really excited about it. But that's a great place to catch me every week. Begging on Cultura. We're on every audio platform. We're on the YouTube streets. We everywhere. So you can catch me there a lot as well.
Awesome. What's next for you?
What's next? So really my main focus right now is getting the podcast to be one of the top podcasts in business. So really spending, as I said, a lot of energy and time in making sure that we are positioned for that and we're on our way. And really doubling down on enrolling more women in the Dare to Leap Academy. My goal is to have 1,000 women in that program, have 1,000 women making money, securing the big bag, making that happen. And every year I host a women's event in New York City. So that's happening this November, November 15th and 16th, 2024. It's our annual Secure the Big Bag and Wellness Summit. So it'll be a combination of the latest business strategy to help you prepare going into 2025, and also how to make sure that you're prioritizing your well-being, because we're usually like sacrificing one or the other. And so it's important for us to like work in a hybrid. And that's really what my brand promotes. Like, don't lose yourself as you are finding yourself, essentially.
Yes.
So that's happening. And just continuing to ask God to use me as a vessel and continue to guide me and continue to keep my family healthy and me healthy. And just, making sure that I take the timeouts as I'm on this path of creating magic and transforming lives, and just prioritizing my happy and my joy. That's what's on the horizon.
I support that. I support that. So last few questions. Do you have a remedio?
Swallow honey and lemon when you got a sore throat.
Okay.
Or hop on a flight and take yourself away from it all. That's always a good remedy. But just remember, like, even though you hop on that flight, the problem's still going to be there when you get back. So just make sure you address what you need to address when you do hop on that flight, so you don't come back and it was a waste.
Totally. Do you have a quote or mantra that you live by, even if it's right now?
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. Meaning, like, it could be in your heart that you want to help people, that you want to like get them to the finish line. And if they are not willing and able to accept your help, your feedback, your consult, your coaching, whatever it is, you have to make sure that you don't start thinking like you're less than, or like you don't have the skills in order to help someone. Like, I had to learn that, especially as a coach. Like, not everybody is going to be able to, be on the path because it's not their time, right?
Yep.
And you just have to know and be aware that it's not you, you know? So,
Totally. Yeah. We can't get attached to the outcome or fall in love with the potential.
right, exactly.
For
Yeah,
sure.
that's a lot of good dating advice too. Don't
100%.
fall in love with the potential, okay?
Yep. I'm sure we all have stories about that.
Right, right.
Okay. And the last question that I ask, well, two more. Do you have a productivity tip, trick, or tool that you want to share?
A productivity tip or tool. Um, I have really gotten good at time blocking. So I literally block everything on my calendar for what needs to happen. And if it's not on my calendar, more than likely it's not happening. But if it is on my calendar, like committing to it. So if I time block, okay, from 10 a.m. to 12, I'm working on this presentation. That's what I'm doing from 10 a.m. to 12. I'm not on social media. I'm not getting distracted. Like, this is what I'm doing. And really training myself to commit to like the time blocks that I put. And that has really increased my productivity.
Nice. And the last question, how are you taking a restorative pause today?
Flying out is one of the ways that I take a restorative pause. But like if you don't have that, because I understand that that's like a privilege to be able to fly out. I would say simple things like going for a walk, like turning off your phone for the day, like journaling, like binging out on your favorite reality TV show.
Mm,
Like I think there's a lot of simple things that we can do to kind of like restore and fill our cup. You just have to find like what is it that works for you. And then once you identify it, like do it
for
as
sure.
often as possible. Like don't procrastinate, don't avoid it, don't keep pushing it off. Like make sure it's a part of your time blocks. Like literally put
Mm,
restoration hour. This is what I'm gonna do.
add it to the toolbox and the calendar.
Right. Exactly.
Love
Exactly.
that. Well, Victoria Jenn, thank you so much for coming to Cafe Con Pam. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. This is such a cool setup. It definitely felt like I was just having cafecito in the sala. So thank you.
Well, no, that was my conversation with Victoria Jenn. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are inspired. Definitely check out her work. I really enjoy people who take their experience and say, you know what, I found a nugget, I found a shortcut. Let me show you how it's done so you don't have to go the hard way. And it's really powerful that we have now lots of representation, which is really cool. And we're not being the firsts anymore many times. And so we have mentors and teachers to guide us, and they can give us those shortcuts and the blueprints to making things happen for us. So that was awesome. Screenshot and tag us on the socials at Cafe Compound Podcast on Instagram and Facebook and whatever other social platform. Probably we're there. Would love a review if you drop some stars, if you leave some notes, thoughts of how the podcast impacted you. Please do leave that information. It's really useful for the algorithms. We even have a podcast algorithm in those platforms that share podcasts. And so I so appreciate it when you leave your reviews. I check every day for new ones, and it's really amazing when I see new stars coming in and new thoughts also come in. Thank you so much for taking the time. Creating a podcast is not easy, and I do this at no cost to you. And so, if you want to give back in some way, leaving some stars is really helpful. Even if you're new here, welcome to Cafe Con Pam. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to know when a new episode comes out. I do want to clarify on YouTube because somebody asked me. So, what happens when we release an episode audio only, which is the first one that comes out on Sunday? That one automatically drops into YouTube. So you have access to, if you are a one that does all the YouTubing, instead of the podcasting platforms, you have access to the audio only on Sunday when the episode drops on Sunday. During the week, by Wednesday is when we drop the episode with the video, because obviously video takes a lot longer to edit, and internally we have to do more things to make sure that the episode is complete. And so if you would rather wait for the video episode, check in halfway through the week. That's when we release it. If you are one that can't wait for a new episode, we release them on Sundays. And this is typically, we have lots of people who listen to Café con Pam on during their Sunday cafecito, or like their Sunday cleanup day. And it's so lovely. And I'm so honored that you choose to put me in your ears. And thank you. Thank you so much. Let's stay connected. I already shared the socials at Café con Pam Podcast, cafeconpam.com, to learn about this story. Check out the show notes. We also have pour overs with additional stories of other incredible people. We have also YouTube exclusives that we share them on the website. You can find a lot of stuff on the website. So check out cafeconpam.com. Let's stay connected. I love hearing from you. So tell me all the things. If you're new, tell me other things. I would love to know. Bueno, listeners, thank you so much for being here. Como siempre, stay shining.
Sabrosura pa' ti que